sentence showing who participated in this evaluation, papers, most of it is results or analysis. And then we will discuss about methodologies, participation. So we will discuss and we involved in me and that's the project we call initiative production for it's not like a lot of practice. So and I think that's a big thing in this case, right? And yeah, it's amazing saying I think all over to become
Because I changed my.
And you can see that many of the pieces in the story are very aligned to the one of the central pillar of the what was in the lab, which is participation, production, SDRs, research of technology and how society and science. And the one and very well-known position of saying science, technology, and field on the sense of society. So this is okay, so I'll do that. And then after that, for lunch, it's great. And I know that most of the world will be involved in this events. And we're going to start our strategy of deployment for this training. All of us in the center of us. It's very, very sort of procedure. There is a very essential area. So there is a festival of science, which was very and ask but PPP tomorrow here, but the rest or Spain was research and yeah, so I then we asked about the creativity of the specialty.
I don't know. I think most of you already know about this issue, so that for those who don't know, I can make even reach back here. I have to be even like what listening, just different talking about like SPUs and activities and all about the knowledge countries and all. So like as we look at the company diverse background, like they have people from skills, English studies, and they look at other disciplines, conventional discipline. So, as a player, this group, entrepreneur was like to like research on this and play elements, especially as we come from experience and from the previous things. So, we have to think about this for now that how this is can be moved with the legal literature. Before it is, we have to use legal, and then legal armor. Some people, especially in this states and the training states, they have to do this, especially through on space because science technology and innovation for portfolio design. The whole idea was how these two stages of literature can talk to each other. SCS has a lot of history where people have been talking about the history of science and technology, how science and technology have been set by different and there are different stages within this field. Now that there is to be one stream that it was more about like activism and science and technology. How you can do activism or like communicate with other and many others that have been talking about like how activism can help us be a better science and technology and it is science and technology. But even still, because like there has been a shift in space and people have started talking more about academic, more about technical academic research basically in magnetic solutions. So people and the legal generation was emphasis on like magnetic solution going from going away from growth season to the more clear and more especially that's one, but at the same time in the legal picture there is not enough emphasis on the idea of technology and how technology comes into the picture. Whereas depending on capitalism, socialism, and economic growth and social conflict, but then how technology has actually can be utilized in all this. So we try to know these two streams, and as you can see in this specialist, we have people from our group that who are part of our group, and then there are some collaborators who we have been closely working. So in your case, the idea we came with this specialist where we decided how we should say, okay, can talk to each other. And the first article in this specialist is about appearance. And you have been long-term collaborators with many of us and with communities. They have talked about the young growth. So the youth growth is again very interesting. It started in the 1970s, and now there is a little movement by going through reflect on the earlier picture of growth. That we may end up like doing same mistake like and we have many people who have been critiquing growth in those days. So he has tried to exercise the debate that how manipulation growth debate came up and what we relates in groups to environment technology was conceptualized during that particular debate and how they were different the key for the growth conception. And then we started drawing on that experience that how new mixes on the growth and question and draw from this from the past experience. We are arguing about like how after the Second World War there was a different imagination of technology, which was more which should have been more fairer for the whole world. But by the 1980s, like how the counter revolution happened, and that has led to internationalization of technology and the focus came back on sustainable development and the critique of sure has remained very has remained a very niche area in the overall paradigm. So that's a very interesting historical take on the next article is by here we have talked about hydrotechnology, like the regular temperature, many times we talk about hydrotechnology as a precursor to people like sometimes I give an example of video. So here I have tried to argue that there is no one idea, there are many ideas. So we have talked about like both sides how the idea of transformation hydrotechnology is constructed and reconstructed. And we are arguing that how we need to be very careful, like when to take this position, rather than taking something very granted, we need to be very aware of this, the ways in which they can be people that we have technological movements. The third article is by Mika and Tess, like where they are talking about from growth to governance. There have been a merge between growth and science literature, and they have argued that how there has been critique of the economic growth models and innovation, but at the same time, how this legal literature societal research should be also improved. So it's not only enough to decide the technological access that the legal literature has, but like how the literature also on the way innovation is recognized in the form of governance. And they have to argue that how European Union talks about the ego is somewhere or another, but at the same time, the fundamental imperative remains the growth or economic. So again, symmetrically the same idea of technological critique, but also the way in which innovation and technology are used to society. So also looking at its ways in which society is used to critique the growth movements. And the fourth article is by Alex and his group, like where they are trying to reframe innovation from from the perspective. In that, they can be pattern discrimination, you treat it in article like how we could move away from the growth museum and the pattern model and they treat the case of really have explained that how different ways of innovation like which were social business in not like different patterns in the community. It's a very wonderful example of doing like personal thinking and institutions which can support personal thinking with our contemporary world. In final article, it's an annual which you have read during the last year of the conference where we talked about the idea of innovation for here we started with when we are Endogenous, obviously, and we talked about like what can be the economic of science and technology as a visual influence. And then we talked about like what can be the implications for ultimately evaluation of science and technology, and finally we talked about some specific examples where most medium can be operational. So as you can see, like we have five very interesting papers, and we try to initiate dialogue between the STS literature and the legal literature. Finally, we relate with certain postulates that how in future we need to work directly engage with the STS literature and the question of technology and innovation when we are talking about legal or consumer. So this is one of the discussions.
So please, we are ready, please.
Yes.
Okay, now it's your turn, and don't worry about the time. Downstairs waiting for us. And you want to extend it?
Well, thank you very much. I've been meaning to make it over for a number of years, so it's great. So, as Barry said, he's a very good friend in collaborator. So we still need to write something together. So joys come, I'm sure, and you know, and all of the work that's coming out of this group, because how can we continue to frame what can be quite static, some really great culture and politics into in this revising. So really happy. So I want to talk about knowledge business. I know that's an issue that kind of interests a number of them. And the other aspect is, well, what does it mean to be kind of an activist in an academic setting? And what does that mean? And what are the politics? Well, what is the long game? So I'm hoping there'll be time to really have a good discussion. So I'm kind of really interested in knowledge and how knowledge travels and really in main experiential and it's kind of misrepresentation in expert institutions, in government institutions, regulatory institutions, funding institutions. You know, it's misrepresented. So that's my argument. One is to look at how that occurs and how that has been open how we know how it's and how very occasionally there are kind of moments of opportunity. So and my injunction is when those moments appear, seize them. Because and they will come in all sorts of strange ways. So there's all sorts of strange possibilities. And when they do, see them. So that's my information. So I'm going to look at this in terms of 4 cases. Actually, 3 quite deeply historical, and 1 that's more known. And the dynamics are kind of mature, which is interesting. So that's what I want to talk about. So a lot of us are involved in public engagement. So that's one of the threads in this work. And there are lots of good reasons for doing public engagement science. And these are some of them. This is also famously much. And a lot of it, ones that really interesting, is giving voice. How do you give voice to citizens? And how do you use that voice to really and actually critique policy representation of voices? So fundamentally, there's a kind of democratic impulse which runs through this. But importantly, it's also how do you hold expert institutions? How do you give responsibilities maybe they might have? So that's the sort of this. So there are lots of ways of doing deliberation, and I'm sure we're all involved in some of them. And so my own particular version of this is being involved very involved in both. So that's the method choice to me. And while there's been a lot of attention to public engagement, so there's also been right and the way within essays, within sciences, and it's completely true that public engagement does not necessarily lead science and technology more classic, transport, which is absolutely response to do that. And so there's been a lot of critique on public engagement as to which is engagement, as to things as they are, as against created agents or systems, having margin. And then there's this kind of epistemological so frame, so who gets to frame what gets taught to the person, and isn't we can't choose really expect these kind of values themselves have performance of gender values of how you think. So what I want to talk about is how to do public engagement versus criticism. So that's the kind of questions that would be very interesting. And so we've got a name, we say this is groups, and the goal really is to engage publics in critical policies. Okay, this is better. Right, okay, so hopefully that will do that. Okay. So that the premise is to empower publics to use their own experiential language to counter, challenge, and recompare dominant public policy representations. And that means that the role then of the analyst, which is a kind of mode of responsibility, is how to make use representation is explicit and so that's the so all cases, and this is I want to have three roots in kind of deep history. So these were when I was kind of early stage postdoc. So that's why is that issues are enduring. So the three cases, the first two cases were in the 1990s. So this is the case in 92, quite a long time ago. And it's a case of nuclear knowledge, about nuclear knowledge. And the key issue that's happening is well, who gets to frame what the issues are? And in Britain, who gets to frame it? Well, of course, it's the Royal Society. The Royal Society. So this august institution that's been around since 17th century sort of represents the institution, science, and what constitutes. So what were they saying at the moment? Well, they were saying that there are objective lists and subjective lists. The objective lists are what's defined by experts, and then subjective lists are kind of emotional. They're what emotionally ignorant people think. And what was interesting is that distinctions are held, pretty often by these client academic disciplines. So there's a kind of a cabal of actors who were all perpetuating this nonsense. There are psychologists, engineers, risk analysts, economists, consultants of various actors, all acting within this frame. And the method of choice was the survey. So this is meant to be a way to understand what topics are. So this methodology is no scope, nuance, emergent, dialogue. So this was, this is what we were acting in opposition to. And the premise, which had been, carried some evidence to surveys, was that those who live close to nuclear plants and nuclear industry are more familiar and more accepting, yes, they're more knowledgeable. So that was the concern. And it's based on in West Cumbria, and I don't know if you know West Cumbria, but you probably heard of the latest. So this iconic rise to a beauty makes Maze National Park. Beautiful mountains and walks and pedestrians and scroll. Well, if you go west of West Cumbria, there's a kind of strip which is a sort of forgotten strip. And it used to be the size of 9. And then that way they moved to West Cumbria. So they decided this is a location needed. So it's wind scale. In the 50s, they changed the name. And at the time we did this research, there was a to reanimate the community industry by having a reprocessing plant. And they were going to take nuclear waste from all over the world, reprocess. And this would be a way of invigorating the use. So our research was asking this fundamental question as well, what do they do in industry? How do we understand the complexity of their thinking and what so that was our so we, and this was the first time we've done it. It's very little. There was work going on. So we tried a very good cultural marketing interest expressions, who's using focus groups for marketing ads. Good. So you thought, well, how do you adapt this method for this case as a way of understanding the text of people focus groups? So how you understood it, risks, respond to claims, and what they thought about this. And so we did it with farmers, fishers, housewives, nationals, apprentices. We did it with claims we all lived in the shadow. And so what do we find? What we find the most is that people get not naive just the need to that basis. They were incredibly dependent, those girls. So they were dependent on the industry. But at the same time, incentives, nation leaks, it didn't really trust regulatory institutions. They were surprisingly, enthusiastic about the road readers, because at least they were watchful. They might not read the Bible, happy that they were there. And they were pretty stoic and quite realistic about this. So, and then there's a lot of informal methods. So we said to we had funding from government, council there, very well, and we said that making acceptance, placing this self, and we understated slightly lower. No, use course and identifying and often stigmatized quite sensitive. So that was the concept of deception. And then we said, we've got to stop these and say, this is the best way to blind yourself to the complex realities. And you say the way that you were doing was actually making it look worse. Okay, you were further stigmatizing communities, and then neglecting your own. So what we did is we gave them what's brainer, we gave them uncomfortable knowledge. So that's what we got into the spirit of giving institutions that's really interesting. So if you give an institution knowledge, you don't expect them to accept everything that you said, you can change their ways. You're part of the long game, you're opening up a long sort of process. And you're putting on its table some really complex situated realities. And this is so deep in front. And of course, government institutions will hit you for that because it really becomes their responsibility and their roles. So instead of them giving jobs, futures, specs, futurity, and excellent, then you're not. You're not sure what those. And so at least getting rid of so that is our personal message of this book. So we continue this with sustainability. And at the time, there was something that's called Agenda 21. So there's the Rio Summit. So everybody kind of annually endorsed, at least this was sustainability, and at least in theory, so this was a huge success of NGO. There's a sense of everybody needs to, not just everybody needs to So there are two aspects to the promise. There's one, the idea that you state unsustainability to sustainability. And the other one is a theory of how we're going to do that. And the prominent theory is exactly so we need to be involved. We need to give them information and so people are also to inform them. And then so that they can see how fast it's happening, people without it, they can see indicators of progress in there. Okay. So this again is the frame you see on which this gender. So we were interested about how people see sustainability life and how they have to government in aiming on sustainability. And what we found is that people were unfamiliar with sustainability, but once defined, they tended to identify. But the mechanism of change that was only partially accepted. They accepted that government is initially trusted to promote sustainability because they see part of the system which are where indefinitely or is more self-interest in your own goals. So the equivalent of trust is tied to honesty and integrity. So this again was our uncomfortable knowledge. So your role and responsibility is not simply to give information, but to say that you if is anyone this is actually trust, alienation are absolutely enough or better with those than behind your initiative. There's another quote by a member of a group of basically led on lessons saying they keep you in the dark and can't understand sustainability. So again, this is the message we go to governments, government agencies, and again, it's rather impossible. But at the same time, once it's out there, it doesn't go away. So that noise from then how do we challenges is that institutional trust has. So the third case is private technology. So this is to do with data, and what we were interested in is how again we can disrupt the government frame. So the frame which is technically run by governments, regulators, experts, with that technology is good. I technology absolutely needed. This is where new mechanical society, logical society, and this is the future to new exercise and resistance as and reduce costs. And so within this frame, the role of government expert institutions is to promote this science. That's their first priority, to assure safety. And to science. So that again is the frame that we were interested in tackling. So the question was, how do people regard and see the prospect of GM foods in the UK in their own terms? And this is again interesting methodologically, how do you have an Endogenous process? That's not just talking about GM content, GM stood, it's basically about food, systems, trust in institutions, all these kind of provides the base, the grounds on which responses to. So to analyze packaging, not just packaging, but what shapes things, how do we and so what have we found? So we find there's a lot of latent concern and when we realize more, contrary to the dominant framing assumptions where European nations more acceptance, more skeptical. So, as to analysts, our question is why? How do you understand this? Why is it more skeptical than independent to this system? The issue became controversial. So this was 2 years before 90%. Able to less than so there are lots of recent skepticism over claims that developments and applying agriculture. So whose agriculture can benefit from it, small holders or large holders. Skepticism over scientific assurances, in part due to the proximity between government and industry, the sense of inevitability and patience, so the sense of this really matters for the agent of it not. So that's Macnaghten sees in the times of heuristic, any memories of that at the time, this was initially level at Paris 12 hours. It's the role that sees spread from house to humans, and because they didn't know, there's no evidence, said sure, with the tension possible, so we have to change as framework regulations and the inside schools. So that is very much in mind, but also the boundaries, estimates nature. And again, it's very important on nature. You mess with nature, there's going to be a review. We know this right from this kind of we know if you mess with nature, there's going to become transgression of boundaries and seems qualitatively different in the state. Really. So again, the attempt was to reconfigure policy agendas. So rather than see systems to be relevant by provision, education, you reframe policy by susceptible unused living in also the risk society. So that's but all an accurate by uses characterized by uncertainty, selection, technologies, and necessary interest, I would say. So again, very uncomfortable, not much happened, but through serendipity, year later, there's huge political controversy, which nobody understood why it occurred. We were arguments year and a half before, so it suddenly got taken up. This is a chief scientific advisor for me, who suddenly came across the report. He was asked by him, government is why weren't we were able to say this. So again, seizing these moments, because we didn't know he was going to happen 18 months later, but it does, we need to do it. And then there's opportunities. Okay, so those are the 3 historical cases. Now, just to show you what has happened, what has changed. Institutionally, fast forward to a couple of years ago, and this was a Dutch dialogue funds. So again, you know, it's been a move to liberalise regulation in Europe around GMO and around genetics. With the idea that genetically is policy stick GMOs, because it doesn't have to involve change the genetic structure within the crop. Like comes to change from this. So it's promoted, again, by the commission document promise, and it's a very important school of governance and regulation, not least so, and there are contrasting views with a less regulated environment, transition, or more sustainable mission of using already used to sustain the old and non-sustainable systems. So, our research, we were interested in how people who got some modified genetics to get sequence in time, older gene techniques, concerns, and more governance. So what we find was a question that framework was a doubted whether ancient crops were there in their responses. And this is what's interesting. So context actually are much better sociologists than expert institutions. Expert institutions over here, just because innovation it's not necessarily means so, you know, that's very interesting sociological naivety, really. Not least because I feel that scientists are necessarily so they express skepticism that's interest in either commercial interests. They argue to text relevance and issues self-convertible and sales. And this is what's interesting. There's all, you know, fundamentals again, very unrecognized. But where's this part of? And certainly our Dutchess and stories you know, and that's again as well. What's going to be the effects of that? It's very classic. Be careful what you wish for. Difference between what you might desire. Again, variation in student. So the question is, well, how does knowledge not going to knowledge policies? Well, yeah, there's a lot that gets lost in this. So this is on the genetics case. So part of the use that risks that what should be assessed in the case of any cases. That's why the commission has no risk assessment by some choice or consumers choice, and the sum moved on see entities in society. First, we aim some movement. But on these other aspects, as you know, a recognition question, harvests, and this is again not that's got any traction as well. Or the manipulation, the idea again, no traction at all, no capacity within policy institutions think like this as a company. This manipulations, arrogance, or sustainability, whereas the public saw that nations is influence, they are influenced in the systemic society nourishment place, whereas on the other so what I'm trying to say is this is old wine in new bottles. So there's a lot of continuity really from the 1890s. And so there's been there's a lot of core issues which have not really gained a huge amount of traction. So risks, people are not just concerned. Not can't alleviate risks. Emergence, concerns are emerging. Relation, institutions understand that social content and relationships shaping, including their own institutional roles in methodology, enables absolute redundant to use this method in interact with regulation, extend the ultimate regulation beyond past harms to raise news, social and disaffection, non-recognition contributes to wider confidence lessons, which usually so then what does this mean for STS academic stroke? Well, in some way, I would argue that this kind of research is part of a standard policy scholarship to transformation, potential or experiential made knowledge to be done. But it's useful. Each paragraph, road, in that sense, in your own work. So extending beyond the technocratic we find a broad range, express, understand, action. And so again, to your deeply engaged with understanding with sustainable relations, associate with. So again, the question is one that extends to recent is well, why is it that quality institutions remain so stubbornly resistant to valuing responses? Why is it that so resistant to presentation of evidence? So how do we understand that? And what would constitute a good understanding of the education? And of course, there are lots of reasons for that. Curious, nevertheless, and interest. There's a lot of that. But on top of it, there's also, and this is really highly encouraged, when people are looking at the dynamics of change around sports innovation, around research. So the fact policy change is rare, it's when anywhere forces or sufficient finance and present a window of opportunity towards the root again. So hence, when this opens happen, you have to join it. And at large, I think this is what I think is an interesting reconfiguration of this. There's this new way of thinking about STS and this idea of the fused knowledge community, which typically are those who use, scientific knowledge to sides of the conspiracy. But actually, it's a policy maker who are use. They're refusing to recognise, acknowledge, and fair. This simply or knowledge. So this is two books which came out recently, one by Smith, which is this idea with huge knowledge and it's very simple stuff. Like in the other book that came out just last week by Martin Kaya and Jerome Bloom. So which is a really secret how environmental policy has actually not really changed at all. And the scripts that they use are basically these can be based. So it's a diagnosis of the way in which environmental policies and it's how they future and then climate change new opportunities to discuss the spaces for so I leave you there. Thank you again for yeah.
Yeah. We have this from the green, and we get some actually of the green. Okay, so who wants to open the discussion? Yes, people are. Fantastic talk. I really enjoyed, especially the last slide. But the comparison of what the network of this. You get this. Oh yeah. No, that's. But I would in yes, terms like you to unpack the black box of this whole problem. If you ever participated in one of these meetings, like how did this thing get lost in translation? And I like you said that it's sort of government implications, but also what are the other things that wants to make say, or why did these things not land within like? Because from my experience in India, there's a lot of locking in policies and huge states and all of things. So what are the situations? Maybe I can follow up on the same line because we are deciding to tell you we are like more and more interested in engaging in this kind of exercise and a project involving gas in this thing with offshore wind power installation. So guys, it's all means if you go to travel, you're going to see a lot of big macro wind farm with a lot of opposition, like increasing opposition from local communities. And Bryce and others are looking at the social acceptance of marine, so offshore installation. And so maybe give some ideas about the kind of focus group that you're organizing because they are going to be very active in public engagement. So maybe some like practicality of doing this kind of exercise.
Yeah, sure. So there are two questions. One is like methodology and that's something which I've been focusing on really quite a lot in the last few years. So I wrote a methodology for the first time to bring together the kinds of approach into it. So there is methodology, papers, research. So that you can and really the ethos behind it is what does it mean to have an endogenous process? So how do you have a process that the issues are within their own almost and a lot of that means you need to study logic and you need to understand concepts. And so this is my overarching critique of a lot of complicated processes. They they're not solutions because they don't try to understand consequences of history and this. And of course, there's no argument parts road. How do we do that so that we change their concepts? But it needs to actually spend at least the first third of the process in trying to grow from a perspective that everybody concerns. How is it that issues are going in this environment? So, or if you want to talk about GM crops and foods, start with food system dynamics around relationships, trust, what's changing, and building ways. We started the project on solar geoengineering. We started on gravel, how do we change and relate to gravel, and then by the climate, how do we really make climate? And then you have the claims of geoengineering response, change the response and recent manipulation, for either SAR or hubris, trying to change the weather, or even use more shade. So that's a really. So I think there's probably that research to say that the methodology is reasonably well and it's quite a lot of ways that it's been used in concepts, including Brazil and actually in Endogenous as well. And again, it's really to be attentive as a moderator and to be attentive to almost the cultural tropes, which when I did in Brazil, we did a work on GMOs, and the key concept there was betrayal, by some, because betrayal is the big cultural thing. So being betrayed by institutions, you producing this GM, not telling us, became such a and this right all in the UK, the keep you in the dark. And that's such an emblematic way, of capturing that and that. Or in the Dutch books, everybody talking about GMs as a slippery slope map to Nazi science, which again, you would not have got in the UK, or probably Spain, either. But for the Dutch, this idea of Nazi science and that slippery slope came across all the time. So it's been really attentive to those kind of cultural nuances that becomes important. Now, of course, reflecting on it, there's a lot of role and responsibility for the analysts and doing. And so that's also doing this, what does that mean? Training, sense, capacity, skills, the other part of the question was to understand the long-term policy institution. And again, this, there's slow movements, but not really that much. So around the turn of the millennium, in these cases, you can no longer talk to engage. So that one. But then to talk to them on what? Well, to talk to them in ways that visit their own frameworks, which was neutral. This we understand their perceptions of this, which is a very myopic view of people's own social lives. The only issue that really matters is this. That's what they're saying. So, so it's sometimes for somebody not that much, or what happens in our learning process says, well, there might be a new achievement of education, but that's an achievement fits in with the old. So it doesn't supplant to coexist all the time. And that's also what so this is well, you have to work with those bits of organization that enable opportunities. Thanks. That's you develop what happens. It's government, it's science wise, whatever else. So that's why there is this, ongoing policies. Responsibility gave an opportunity to us. But then it's got this tendency of instrumentals, deficits, whatever else. This is sociological point. So it's just it's an ongoing where things not choose to go back into still. It's very difficult. It's the same thing for you. Well, we've got to balance, you've got a much higher education, but still, we're not quite up there. We can't do them. So that's the task. And say, yes, you can, and this is how you do that. So there are all sorts of challenges. But it's been, it's been kind of attentive to what the dynamic, what the citrus elements are, in which you then do.
I say at the same time, if I see broader working, so STS actors, important activities for academicians, how do we see them as the knowledge workers? Or we see them from the lens of knowledge workers, then how STS as a tool as a influence these differences. So as you have been mentioning that the methods to cause and understanding the public understanding as state from separate units. Even like IRI is a very okay, but then like they get co-opted all the time. So there are two things. First, like sometimes like people don't accept like the knowledge which you bring on the table as a knowledge broker, as an instance guy, understand this complex thing. Second, the methodologies which you come up are get co-opted. So first, sometimes co-opted. So what we have been doing right or what we have been doing wrong as a discipline to influence like disease in real life. Is it a structural question or is it like beyond our capacity as it were? Because there are other groups, like there are other knowledge groups on this thing. People are most engineers, the only group that you are trying to launch for the different kind of knowledge which we can do.
Well, yeah, I have to say that, life goes mysterious, right? I mean, you look at what you mentioned, the ERC, the fund, a large project on growth, you would have thought it. And yet things happen, and things happen all the time. So yes, there's intent. But at the same time, it's one, just as one option. Those it's another. That's why I didn't have any kind of regret whatsoever that the European Commission decided my own decisions. It's like, why should it? You don't hang on, to ideas which no longer do what they should. They run. So I think it's that's what I mean by long game, right? Might sound the most historical. Because every now and then we choose to like the most interesting. And I don't know which was there's Boris Johnson, remember he's Prime Minister, a very good one. And his chief of staff is something called Dominic Cummings, who's even worse. But he's very bright. He decided to revamp the fund system into agency, advanced research and invention. And they wanted to break through. But actually, that became a site, future innovation, or STS, the social science, you would have mentioned. And so I think it's almost like an ethos that you can't get out into And you can't also contest the legitimacy of which those as well. And then things that occur like that, which are right, still not much. I don't think any now that I'm actually don't choose matters. So yes, there's always the danger, but I also there's this possibility of developing critical mass, competencies, legitimizing, particularly doing research, which is stressing its boundary. Everybody wants science to use that role, but now we know that doesn't necessarily. So, what's happening in the US? It could be a huge sense of grants to science, but actually, there could be huge opportunities that are critiques of big pharma, corruption, these terms of COVID, where it all came from, and what happened to it. It's rapidly evolving sort of theme all the time, which kind of leads really to have a sense of flexibility rather than so, post-growth was great, it's doing a job. It might morph into something else, it's not to get hang on and so forth. This is the end of the world, it, and we want to hang on and keep going. No. Other things, instead of also need to be concepts, but not least the rigid text to rigid ideas in the sense. So I think that's about it.
Yeah, maybe, thank you. Maybe just to continue on your answer right now, because to me, it sounds quite opportunistic to think of, changes, what you said, for example, in the government. I mean, there were huge losses for livelihoods through that government of Johnson, and to bring it as something where it gives SDS scholars an opportunity. I think maybe I want to push back on that a bit in, where's our integrity then in that conversation in terms of how do we see the risk of cooptation and the risk of political changes that are happening right now, for example, in the US, where international admission to universities being cut from various universities. But how do we of course, there's always opportunity, but also there's huge risks, in how do our field, how do we not become maybe romanticizing opportunity for social discipline, but actually think about it is also the reality of the world, and what might be an opportunity for me to study something is the loss of another livelihood. So. And I think it's struggling a little bit with that romanticization of kind of opportunity, but maybe that's a bit.
I don't see it. I wasn't meant to be romanticizing opportunities. It's to do with any of them. There are always opportunities within this system. It's based strong rather than criticizing what this opportunity look. So that's more near point. So I think the content is not a romanticism, it's institutional connect that there are profound and democratic processes involved, and it's engaging with them precisely to say that no experience matters, and it matters and so that's why that's at the heart of the process. And the fact that they're misrepresented by government, legal industry, local government, means that that's a kind of it's technique, an unwanted technique for profound alienation. So that's it, and there's something romantic about that at all. And that's where it starts. And that's why at the heart of any kind of search for you first and foremost is experience of people that you work with. And it's very important and to represent an institution and comes these with this mode, there are lots of other things. But for this one, that's what it's incredibly more for that's what drives the increase.
Pretty much. You talked about particular dynamics that open doors of opportunity for change. And I was curious. Yeah. So from your experience, what kind of particular dynamics, some types of particular dynamics that you know from the could you tell us more of that? You don't disasters that you are conscious. What can open pursuits?
I mean, for me, it's always starts with relationships. Always starts with relationships. So when we started the nuclear, we developed relationships. Those that were involved, plans, plans. And the common point there is how to more accurately more care to represent the views of of their within. So it starts from when we start with Unilever again. It started from the sense Unilever were very interested in not seeing people just as consumers but as citizens and have a way of interacting with consumer environmental. So that became the concept of saying, well, do you work with them? So I think the relation within organizations, it's usually plurality, plurality, understanding, so to develop our opinions, because they were interested in terms of reflecting on their own language, the way they represent the environment, and how to connect that to other ways of environmental practices. So we did this work in payments, we kind of understood that their membership in most of North America and Europe produced in a global cycle engage communities there. So that there's a sense of common purpose then provides foundation. When we did work on GM crops in the global cycle, and again we were interested in academics. There wasn't much time understanding as to why this is in Brazil. So again, it's how do you bring to recognition the lived experiences of citizens with Americans, and then to our roles, how do you like in terms of then in us. So it all starts with relationships, and that's I think at the heart of
Today I agree with all your discussion about survey, the needs of survey, and the governance policy, it's not. And it's also coming, usually governments. And my question is about the scale, you know, how do you envision this like, post-global whatever possible in the period of the future, in which science, technology is really like a part of the development process and scale. So how you engage with like millions of people that need in scale, for example, on the topic, when you have it's very difficult to the things that you're doing, you know, how this group and whoever here being involved in doing all this group analyze and consume really with sociological aspect, you know, and the relation stuff is you need to speak the language, understand life, you know. For example, here in the field of the offshore wind. And so there is a lot of interest in terms of the fishing, traditional fishing and industrial fishing here. So, and Danish is basically, you know, the biggest producer of seafood in Europe, second producer on well, after China, on mussel, for example. And this is like disrupted, no? So how do you, yeah, so you need to know about life of fishermen, fishermen,
Yeah.
seafood collectors and stuff. So you spending a lot of time there with them. How do we engage with like massive millions of people? It's an issue. So
We had a discussion of this last week. Is it possible to have this sort of scaling, or is scaling itself part of kind of knowing these times? So we know what's best. We will scale on, and I suppose I think scaling is the idea we scale on. If an idea resonates and bring the idea to be, then others will pick it up and will have so dynamics scale. Without us thinking that we will scale up the idea. And then so the genome is very interesting. So how does that scale up? So of course those dynamics going on. So what in our study is a kind of a recognition of the tacit concern. And I remember the scale just be one vignette. So this vignette was we said, well, if GMOs colour, and then she said, well, so that sense of the performance of this, but also the lack of agent within that activity, but the sense that it's nothing you can do. So she said, when I leave this, I'm not going to, I refuse to do that. It's if I'm to think about it, I'm going to be depressed. I don't. So the strategy of well-being is not to engage. There's no point. There's no open. And then Greenpeace come in. They had a campaign. It's once those who do the else, or it's not being paid, married, whatever. And they try out these campaigns all the time. And and I remember it's a guy who worked from he was chair for it. It is saying we should have campaigns on technology and Greenpeace. You can't have this. I think it'd be more boring than having a campaign that we want to have big votes and getting spread far whatever else. But they try that. And it lost everyone. The newspaper, ranking foods, consumer groups, Greenpeace survey on it, even the Tory party got involved because this is when Blair was pretty get out of it, talking about more than ever else. So that is scaled up, not by us as Tories, we're going to scale it up. But you've got to trust in the power of good ideas, your dynamics, relationship, and then things for the power. Without thinking, we're going to know we want something. It's up to us now to stand it up, not exist. It's up to us to put ideas out. Some will work, most won't. We don't know which ones are, they're false. We have integrity ourselves. And then the magic happens. So that's, so that's fine. So you've got to trust those processes. And keep on experimenting, as that's the other one. Keep on with integrity. And then, the post-stroke is a very good instrument. Lots of dynamics in with them getting opportunity for this really to flourish.
Yeah, actually, postcode is like it's a typical binary object, no? It's actually is that being I don't know, not yet got it from the future, but there are many like different options. For example, it's a very strong platform based on what they checks on other people like analysis, SSC. Okay, well, there are questions. No. Okay, so we can continue on the lunch. Thank you very much. Tess, do you have some question? Tess, unfortunately, it's a little bit sick. So
Hello.
Yeah. Hi, Tess.
Hi. Can you hear me?
The government's for feeling.
Hi, Tess.
What?
You starting not meeting so well.
I am sick on the couch. Unfortunately, the acoustics in there are quite difficult to understand.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to follow. So I don't have a question for Phil, but I hope that I get to see you before you leave. And I'm really sorry I can't be there.
Maybe tomorrow or the day after tomorrow.
We'll be staying right next to you, so they can work the chance to.
Yeah, let's say you come back.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you very much, Billy. And we're going to, no, we recorded, right? We recorded and we upload them. And for me, it's been incredible, like, pleasure having you here. And let's continue the discussion of the lunch.